Hey Internet, what's going on? So today I want to talk to you about my secret AI method for never running out of YouTube ideas for content when creating. I'm going to show you exactly how I built this AI-powered system that automatically generates content from YouTube comments. With that being said, let's get into it. Okay, so as always, we have a really cool image given to us from the ChatGPT gods, where we have an interesting setup here, where we have an idea machine where we push a button, and after we press that button, it's going to give us ideas for content we can create for future videos that are not only just ideas, but ideas that people are interested in. And that's kind of the premise of this idea is I wanted to create something that when I created content, it was based off of what people are actually interested in hearing about instead of strictly of what I'm interested in or what proactively comes to me. So it's going to be a mix of both now. It's going to be what people are interested in, but also what I proactively come up with because we got to keep my interest, right? So first, I'm going to show you how the system actually functions. So zoom in here. This is how the system works. And we'll start on this side. Where first things first, we generate the idea. So we have a button that we're going to push, and this button's going to sit inside of Google Sheets. I'll show you that later. And then once we push this button, we're going to go off into a process. So first, we need to get channels. So this is going to be human-oriented. So we probably want to get this first prior to pushing the button, obviously. And you'll basically get channels that you admire and or your own channel. So right now, since my channel isn't massive and I don't have thousands of hundreds of comments, I'll need to actually go to other channels that are in the AI space that are doing something similar to what I'm doing and then seeing what their audience are interested in hearing about. So I'll make a list of probably 6 to maybe 8 channels from YouTube. And from those channels, we'll move to the next step. So the next step here is getting the URLs. And we're going to use a system here, a tool called Apify. And Apify is a good scraper that allows you to scrape different types of things. So we'll first need to get the video URLs from these YouTube channels. And we'll get, instead of getting tons of them, because I don't want to necessarily get things from way in the past, we're going to get things for the previous 3 videos. So I'm assuming that most of these creators do at least weekly things. So if I get 3 videos, that means we're going to be probably 3 weeks out from the date I pull. Once we get the video URLs, we're then going to pass this off to another scraper because this is a scraper that gets URLs. And there's a scraper here, also URLs for videos. Basically, it's the premise here, videos. And then after this, we're going to pass it off to another Apify scraper that focuses on comments. So this is going to scrape all of the comments, not all, but some, the comments from this YouTube video. And then we're going to, after we've gotten the comments, we're going to pass this off to Gemini. So we've gotten, in this case, I think the biggest run that I did was around, was it 1,000? I think it was 1,010 comments. And then we pass this off into chunks. And the reason we pass this off into chunks is the way we're placing this and how it's sitting, we're going to put this in AppScript, which is inside of Google's Sheets. So I didn't want to build an application completely from scratch here. I just wanted to use something simple and fast because this isn't something I'm going to sell to others. So it's basically something for myself that's easy to set up. No need to create a database or anything like that, a UI. So I'm going to put this in AppScript that's going to sit in Google Sheets, and we'll get to that in a second. We're first going to pass this Gemini. Gemini is going to then analyze the comments in chunks of 250. Once it's analyzed these chunks, it's going to look for a few things. It's first going to analyze all the questions, and it's going to find the questions first, analyze those questions, and then try to find themes in the questions. Once it's found themes in the questions of different types of things that are people asking for, we're then going to pass this off to a ranker. So this is also going to be in Gemini, and the ranker is going to score it. So it's going to score it based off of a few things. One is the frequency of the question being asked. So how many times has this same question been asked? Next is how many upvotes are on this specific comment. The next thing after that, I think, is number of replies to that question. So these are the variables that I figured would be the most interesting to viewers, or at least the most interesting to garner ideas for YouTube channels or YouTube ideas. And these are weighted differently. So I think it's like 50, 30, 20 is the weighting here. And all of these feed into a macro score that is then placed into Google Sheets. And that score is associated with the topic discussed, so a kind of summary of the topic, and then a title for the YouTube video idea, and then also the idea. And these are placed in different orders, so let's actually scratch this out. So it's topic, then idea, and then title, I think it was. Something along those lines. And then also the score, obviously. So that's all then shoved into Google Sheets, and that's what the final output looks like. Now, what does this actually look like? And I want to show you what it looks like. So I'm going to open up the results from a previous run. Okay, so here is what a previous run looks like. So the input are the channel URLs. So here we have Cole, Riley, Stefan, etc. These are the different YouTube channels we want to scrape comments from so we can get ideas for those in the future. Here we have the logs. So this is where we store all the logs when we kind of troubleshoot different errors for our app script. We have the ideas output. So one for you, one for me. So here you have the idea. So we have the idea associated to the themed conversation. So there's a lot of different questions that are happening and suggestions happening. Gemini aggregates those inputs and places them in the idea column after it's idea figured out a theme. Then in column C, it has suggested titles. So these are different titles that it recommends for a future YouTube video to cover that topic. And at the end, it selects one. It's based off of its understanding of what's more viral in the sense of getting more clicks and views. So these are different titles that are recommended. And below, or before that, or after that, we have the scores. First, we start with the intent score. So this is the aggregation of all the previous scores that are weighted. And after that, we have frequency. So how many times has the suggestion or question been mentioned? How many votes have been associated to that question or suggestion, and then also the total replies associated to that question or suggestion across videos within this bucketed theme. Then we get our total intent score. So here you can see that CAG versus RAG was the primary one that won out. Not something for today, but maybe for a future video if I keep using this method. And TLDR and CAG versus RAG is CAG is context aggregated or retrieval augmented generation. So context augmented generation, and you're basically the AI has a memory, and the memory is sometimes limited in its ability to get information outside in the world. So people attach a database to that, which is RAG. But in the sense that models' context windows are extending, you can shove a bunch of information into that context window, and its ability to retrieve that more effectively is getting better over time. So the question is will RAG become obsolete in certain use cases? Answer is likely, probably, but we'd have to research that further to come to a conclusion. So this is the output. This is what it looks like when we're done. Now let's go back to this section because I want to talk through, because we talked through how the system works, right? So I want to talk through how do I work? How do I build something like this? How did I build something like this? So I've talked through this process previously, and I'll do a quick TLDR here so you can get a better understanding of how it works. First, starting out, we have 3 different documents that are going to be that are going to come out of this process. And this process is actually from Harper. So this is Harper's blog, and Harper put this piece together a few months ago. And this is the process that I and many others use, or modifications of this. So I started with the base of Harper's process, or I had a process before that, but I adopted his. Then I've created modifications of it over time. And you can see that throughout this process, I'll show you kind of what needs to be copied out and associated pieces to the process. So in here, what do we do? First things first is we get the what. We get the spec. So the spec is defining what this product is going to be and do. Next, we're going to have this spec create a blueprint. So we're going to have an AI model create the spec through an interview. We're going to shove that into a smarter model to then create a blueprint, which is how we build this. So this is the step-by-step process. And then lastly, we're going to have to-dos from the blueprint, which is going to be the roadmap for our AI. And this is really important. It's something I've talked about in the past, but I'll quickly touch on it now. We have a high-level focus and a low-level focus for the AI that's building this for us. And oftentimes what we want to do is we want to ensure that we can actually have the AI bounce back and forth between high and low to keep it focused on the task at hand and ensure it's following the right path strategically. Reason being is the AI gets lost in the forest. So it's like, don't get lost in the forest of the trees, or whatever the analogy is, where the AI is building code, writing code, and it forgets the strategic roadmap of where it's headed next. So what we want to do is we want to shift its focus back and forth after it's finished a phase. So after it's finished one phase in the to-do, we'll then have it go back to the to-do list, mark off those checkboxes, and then move to the next phase, and then build that phase out. Once it's finished that and successfully tested, then we go back and mark it off. And we go back and forth, building out the entirety of this application with that to-do list acting as a roadmap, as well as a blueprint on how to do so. And that's really the basic process. Now, before we get into the process, I always recommend all my clients start with research. And the reason we start with research is there's a lot of stuff that the model doesn't necessarily know or have access to. In our case, when building this application, we needed a few things. We needed Apify, like I've talked about previously, to do the scraping. We would need the docs associated to this, but we also needed to call out specifically that we wanted to use a newer model. So we wanted to use 2.5 Pro. And the reason we wanted to use 2.5 Pro is it's cheap, but it also has a good reasoning ability to reason over a long context window and pull out interesting themes and ideas. Now, I had to state this explicitly in our document to ensure that the model didn't use older models, because oftentimes when we're using Gemini or OpenAI, they're trained historically, so they're not necessarily going to know that a few weeks ago a new model was released. So we want to shove both the constraint in there saying we want you to use this model, as well as associated URLs and documentation, so it can then bake that into the spec as well as the blueprint and the to-do list, everything downstream from the spec. So now we have an understanding of this. We've done the research, and the research, usually what I'll do is I'll start with Perplexity, and I'll usually sometimes go to now O3. So O3 is a version, it's the newest model from OpenAI, and it does a pretty good job at doing fast, deep research, where it reasons and searches the web simultaneously and comes out with an output that's actually quite effective and useful. So that's what we do first, is we research. Once we've researched and got additional context, we'll shove that into our spec alongside a few other things. And the few other things here is going to be intent, user, job to be done. I'd bucket these into the same thing. We could probably just remove this and focus on this. And then user, this is going to be me, so that's pretty straightforward. This application was for me to use. But if you have different users, you want to make that specifically known. And the job to be done, this is critical. When you're writing your spec, you want to ask yourself, when a user comes to this application, what do they expect to get from it? What is their purpose of being here? And in this case, the purpose of me being at this application was to walk away with ideas. And not just ideas for YouTube videos, but ideas that have been derived from what viewers want to know. So these are questions and suggestions of viewers and their interests of what they care about when it comes to content they want to see. So that's the intent of the application. So we need to ensure that it's very clear in the context when we pass this over to the AI to write the spec. Then we start the interview process. So when you're creating a spec, it's an interview. And we'll start with using, I think it's O4 Mini is what it's called now. So there's different types of models. There's O4 Mini, O4 Mini High, O3, etc. I always choose the fastest reasoning model for this step of the process because it's going to take a lot of back and forth. So we're going to have likely 50 or 15 to 20 back and forth iterations of the AI asking me a question, I answer the question, asking me a question, I answer the question. And sometimes it'll ask me a question where I don't necessarily know the answer. And if that's the case, then I'll say either you choose, or I'll ask it to provide more context and options so I then can make a more informed decision. So I'll say you choose, or what do you think based off of this, and then giving you some more context. That's the process of the interview. I'll show you more specifics on my example for this application. I'll kind of walk you through my building of the spec, blueprint, and to-dos, and then I'll let you go off and build this or other apps. So the next step here is the blueprint. So we've established our spec. The spec has been created by O4 Mini. Once it's created that, we're going to copy and paste that into a smarter model. So we're going to copy and paste this into a smarter model to then create the blueprint. And in that case, we could either use O3, but for me, I've been using Gemini 2.5 Pro recently. And the reason I've favored it for this specific step of the process is its ability to have a higher token output in accordance to other models. So it can basically talk a lot more and provide more specifics. And that's useful, especially when you're creating beefy blueprints. Now, in this process, what's going to happen is we're going to go through 2 to 3 rounds of getting more and more detailed in how to do this. So what does that mean? So we have this building of the application broken into phases. So we have phase 1, phase 2, phase 3, etc. And this right here is going to be explained by the AI, but this is only going to be round 1. And when it explains it, it's going to have a high-level definition or explanation as to how to build this. But in the prompt we provide, we ask it explicitly to go through multiple rounds, 2 to 3 rounds of getting more and more detailed into how to build this application. So we're going to go through this process multiple times, and we're going to try to get as detailed as possible on how to do this. So that's round 1, this is round 2, round 3, etc. As it gets more specific, once it's finished, we'll have round 3 here over here. And at the very bottom, it's not working. There we go. At the very bottom, we're going to have our prompt. So I'm going to come back up here to grab this here, and it's going to spit out a bunch of prompts associated to each phase. So it's going to have here, it's going to have phase 1, and then phase 1 will have a prompt. And then phase maybe 1.A or 1.B will then also have a prompt. And it's giving me these prompts because these are system prompts we're going to copy and paste into the AI that's going to build the code for us. That's inside of Cursor. So that could be 3.7 Sonnet, 2.5 Pro, whatever else. So that's the establishment or establishing of the blueprint. And then lastly, after we have that, we'll then ask the smart model again, after it's finished writing the blueprint, just to spit out a to-do list as well, and make sure that it puts it in Markdown. And the reason we're putting it in Markdown goes back to the point previous, so we can check off the boxes as we go and make sure that we're bringing the AI back and forth between strategic and specific. And that's the overall process that I follow when I build applications. There's some minor nuances around debugging things and other things, but this is at a high level what I do. Now, what I want to do is I want to share with you specifically my process for doing this and the associated sources that I used. So first, the scrapers. When I did the research, I found, okay, Apify has the best and cheapest scrapers, so we're going to use those. And here we have these scrapers. So I'll go back here so you can see this one. And wait, I already had that up open. So go, wait, sorry. Comment scrape, sorry. Here we go. So we have two. So we have the fast YouTube channel scraper, and this is going to scrape the channel's videos. Once we have the video URLs out, we're going to pass those video URLs to the YouTube comment scraper, which is then going to take all the comments out. So it could take 50, it could take 250, how many ever are there. Once we've done that, I've already walked you through the rest of the process, but these are the two sources we're going to use to scrape and pull the information out. I've already shared you the results, so that's in the Google Sheet. And then finally, we have the interview as well as the blueprint. So that's the interview. This is the blueprint. So let's focus on both of these. All right, for the interview, I'm not going to read this entire thing to you because it's quite beefy, but I'm going to walk you through at a high level what's going on here. So like I said, in the Harper blog that I mentioned here, we have very specific things we want to copy in that is the constant that stays consistent throughout all of these, that's giving constraints to the AI when it writes these different pieces of documents. So I'll read this out. Ask me one question at a time so we can develop a thorough step-by-step spec for this idea. Each question should build on my previous answers, and our end goal is to have a detailed specification I can hand off to a developer. Let's do this iteratively and dig into every relevant detail. Remember, only one question at a time. Here's the idea. Now, there's a few important things here. One is that we're saying only one question at a time. We're specifying that because we want to ensure that it's asking us one question and then having the previous answer inform the next question. We make that explicit here as well. Each question should build on the previous answer. We're doing this because oftentimes if you ask an AI to interview you, it sends 10 questions simultaneously and you have to answer them all at once. That's not useful for one reason, it's overwhelming for the human. Number two, it's not informing the next question. So you want to make sure that the spec you get out is as specific as possible, relevant to the context and things you care about. So once you've done this, you then give your idea. And this is where we give the constraints and the specifics of the intent, the user, etc. So I'm basically stating, hey, I want to create an app that takes YouTube URLs for channels, scrapes the most recent 3 videos, then passes this off to another scraper to then pull out the comments. Once you've done that, then you should pass it off to this model to then do the assessment on the comments to find ideas for future videos. You can see here I've actually stated 2.5 Flash. Halfway through the build, I decided to pivot to 2.5 Pro. After that, we have more specifics around how the AI model should extract the videos and the information associated. And I even then gave some documentation. So down here, I actually linked out to the comment scraper and the associated docs for that comment scraper that you can get from the Apify actor. So if you go here under information, I basically copied and pasted out this section here and put that into the spec so it had the context. So once we get past here, we start to get to the questions. So the first question is, okay, who's the primary user? I didn't make that explicit. I should have, like I told you to. I said, it'll be me. And then I gave some more information. Then it said, okay, what information do you want to store for each video's ideas besides the idea text and its catchy title? So then this is really important. So oftentimes what happens with AI in this interview process is that it asks you a question. And then after it asks you a question, it then gives you a very specific example to reference. And this is useful because oftentimes when it asks questions, it gives really, really good questions that are thought-provoking, but sometimes we don't know the answer. And if it gives us a nudge with an example, that's helpful and useful. And that's what it's doing here. So it's saying, for example, do you need to track source channel? The source of the channel? Do you need a date discovered, interest score, or anything else? And I was like, oh yeah, like interest score, that would be dope. Let's do that. So then it adds that information. Also, you can see I said, okay, can we use 2.5 Pro instead of 2.5 Flash? Then it goes through here and it asks a bunch more questions around the information to be included. Like I said, I'm not going to read through all of these, but I'll call out a few. Let's see. So you can see I'm getting real short. I'm like, all good. That's great. Here's a good one. So right here, I said, what's easiest? So in the sense of it, ask me a question and said, okay, what credentials do you want to use for your application? I'm like, all right, well, this is as a proof of concept. It's just for me. It's running on my own local stuff, so I don't need to be super secure. What's the easiest thing we can do to stand this up? And it's like, okay, well, like you could do this one. So all right, great. So let's do that. And you can see that I outsource some of the thinking, not just the question asking, but the thinking as well to the AI. And I do that intentionally because some of the answers I don't know some of the questions I don't know the answers to. And that's the same case that you'll run into as well. So after we've run through all of this, we then come to the end, which should pop up in a second. For some reason, when you refer back to older chats that have really long outputs, they cache it or they shorten it. So you have to like then pull it back out. All right, cool, here it is. So here's basically the entirety of the spec, breaking down exactly what we're trying to build in the associated architecture. So you can see we have the architecture, we have everything else here. So I'm gonna copy and paste this out into Gemini 2.5 Pro, and that's what this conversation is. But before I paste it in, so everything below this is the spec. So all of this stuff here is the spec. And then above this is the constraint that we're going to give to the AI when it comes to writing the blueprint. And you can see that's the same exact thing we have from here. So if I go back here, we'll zoom in, even though their UI is really, really, really bad. All right, so you can see, I won't read the whole thing, but we'll go through this quickly. So we draft a detailed step-by-step blueprint for building this project. Once you have a solid plan, break it down into small iterative chunks that build on each other. Look at these chunks and then go another round to break it into even smaller steps. Review the results and make sure that the steps are small enough to be implemented safely with strong testing, but big enough to move the project forward. Iterate until you feel that the steps are right size for this project. So this goes back to the point we made previously, where we're actually asking it to go iterative steps, so creating multiple rounds of iteration to get more and more specific, so it's easily doable for the AI engineer to follow up. So once we've done that, it goes through the process and creates the file. So let's scroll down here. And you can see here is, so this is phase one. So this is initially giving the detailed blueprint of the specification of how detailed it can be. So this is the high level understanding of how to build this application. And then below this, we have the refined phase. So this is making it more specific, going even further into the phases that it mentioned above. And then after this second iteration, I think we go into prompts. So here you can see we have the prompts that we're going to utilize to build the application. So these are the prompts we're going to copy and paste out of this blueprint into our AI to then build. After it's given us all the prompts, we then at the very end ask it for a to-do list. So let's go, you can see there's quite a few prompts here. So you can see, okay, so can you make me a to-do .markdown that we can use to use as a checklist please be thorough. So then it gives us a checklist. So we have phase one, all the associated things that need to be completed. And as these get completed, I then ask the AI to then come back and check these boxes off as it iterates through. And then once it's finished with this, we then go to phase two, do the same thing. Phase three, do the same thing. And that, my friends, is the process. That's how we build this application. That's how I build most applications. And yeah. So let's get over to our image. Internet. I hope you found this useful. I hope you found this entertaining, exciting, all that stuff. And if you enjoyed it, please reshare it with your friends. Also, if you'd like to work with me, I have a company called Gradient Labs, where we help companies incorporate AI internally to increase their productivity, save time, save money, and sometimes even increase revenue. So there's a link below, a discovery call that you can book that's free for 30 minutes to see if there's a good fit between you and me. And with that being said, Internet, I'll see you next time.